And if you didn't think you had enough breaking news, I got a little bit more for you when it comes to the Russia probe. Washington Post reporting now that Paul Manafort offered to provide briefings on the presidential race to a Russian billionaire with deep Kremlin ties. This happened 2 weeks before the Republican convention. Manafort made the offer over email, and that email was turned over to Bob Mueller's office. And so it goes. Now let's look at the team who is working for Bob Mueller and some of the specialties. Kyle Freeney, he worked at Justice Department's Criminal Money Laundering Division. Aaron Zebley, partner at WilmerHale, also worked at the DOJ's National Security Division. Mueller was also a partner over at WilmerHale. Janine Rhee, you may remember her name. Janine Rhee, she was partner at the same law firm, and she also worked at the DOJ on national security issues. Andrew Weissman, FBI General Counsel, also worked at the fraud section of the DOJ. James Quarles, Assistant Special Prosecutor at Watergate, and he was another partner over at the same firm in question. Greg Andrews was DOJ official, he also worked on the Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption and Fraud Cases Division. Lisa Page, an FBI attorney, also trial attorney in their Organized Crime Division of Department of Justice. Rush Atkinson, he worked at their Securities and Financial Fraud Division over at DOJ. All right, speaking of guys who weren't at that same law firm or DOJ at the time, let's bring in our panel of attorneys. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Carson Von Oist, former prosecutor as well. He focuses on corporate misconduct now and was selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC, and also former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And Mark Furnish, a distinguished adjunct professor at the Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University.
I don't think Andres and Weissman would agree with that assessment.
Yes.
But we'll get to that.
We will get to that. He's also argued with everyone, including all the way up to the highest court of the land at the Supreme Court. All right, a lot to unpack here. We've talked about the team that Mueller's assembled here. Obviously, people with specialties, familiarity. They've been involved with federal probes. But if we take anything away from the multitude of news we've gotten this past week, and you saw me talk with our friend Bob about, Bill, about a bunch of different avenues that could go, what jumped out at you to the most, Mayo, that said, now I have an idea, in addition to casting a wide net here, where maybe Mueller will be trying to focus the investigation on?
Well, I think that you always look for the weakest link, and the fact that it was leaked that supposedly Manafort was told he's going to be indicted is significant, because it goes toward now his state of mind and what does it really mean to him, and what can anybody actually give him. So normally the most dangerous person is the person who has nothing left to lose, and that's probably, at this point, Mr. Manafort, because he can testify and increase his odds of avoiding a significant jail sentence. Also, presumably, he's a person who has a tremendous amount of information. And with all of these types of cases, what we see, what we're privy to, is always the tip of the iceberg. Generally, these investigations are pervasive. You have so much information that we're normally not privy to, that the tentacles of this investigation can go and be extremely far-reaching.
And obviously, we saw that with the Clinton probe and where that ended up going with Bill Clinton. But Mark, from what you've heard, and let's make, and it's a hypothetical at this point because there's no evidence remotely, but let's say that Donald Trump was intimately involved with the planning of his campaign for conversation. What news that you've learned would be the most troubling that has come out in the last week?
Nothing, to be honest, really troubles me about it. I do agree with what Mayo said. It's not a surprise that they've homed in on Manafort. We've known for a long time, I think, that Manafort and Flynn have had a criminal exposure. Evidently, Manafort's lawyers have been talking with Congress for quite some time and apparently stonewalling them with some degree of efficacy. And Mueller is ramping up the investigation now, because the longer this goes on without it turning up anything concrete, the more open Mueller and his team will be to allegations that it's a fishing expedition. So
fair enough.
They're
but one of the things,
now.
Mark, I figured you were going to say was, if you believe the reporting, and for this conversation, let's assume it's true, that on the Facebook aspect, what they turned over to the feds, shows that there was sophistication beyond what anyone thinks internet trolls in Russia would have had, not in terms of the fake information that was put out there, but the coordination of the specific districts in question that the Trump campaign was targeting and the specific swing voters. I've spoken to a lot of folks who say that definitely will show some coordination. I don't know how high it goes or who has fingerprints on it, but it didn't happen out of thin air.
Well, again, I don't think it's subject to dispute that the Russians were trying to influence the outcome of the election. That's been widely reported. We've known that all along. The key question is what you just alluded to. What did they know and when did they know it? Who, if anybody, in the administration was involved in those efforts? And look, to be fair, I think it's right what Mayo says. We get very selective reporting. It's coming out in drips and drabs. I think Manafort has always been the end of the spear, so to speak. What exposure he has, how broadly Mueller is viewing his mandate. I mean, I think there's some credence to what Trump has been saying. If this starts to spiral into a widespread investigation of Manafort's financial dealings going back many years, it becomes more attenuated from the campaign fraud relations at hand.
Doug, when we in the outside world that don't travel in yours hear about no-knock warrants, hear about literally guys storming a Virginia apartment here, and by the way, getting not one but two warrants here because they proved, at least to the satisfaction of the judge, that there was real concerns that there could be destruction of evidence. It seemed like, what's that line? Things got escalated really quickly here. Were you a little surprised there wasn't some invitation over coffee to talk about the case with the Manafort's attorney? Instead, they're patting down the wife here, et cetera, for weapons.
Yes, it was very unusual. Usually that's a context of somebody with drugs where they're going to get rid of the drugs, and if you knocked and you went in nicely, they'd get rid of the evidence. But, you know, I'd like to make a point about what Mark was just saying. You know, putting aside Donald Trump, because people feel very strongly about him, you have a politician who's come from the private world, and now you have a situation where you just put up there the dream team of prosecutors who are out there looking and turning over every stone. You know, if this doesn't turn into something that's directly related to Donald Trump doing something wrong himself, not people around him, you're sending a chilling effect with what's going on now.
Except if there's coordination from a campaign at all, this is where I'll part company, even if it doesn't go to the fingerprints of the president, but his campaign had involvement, and with all the ancillary information about holding meetings to try and dig up dirt that Donnie Jr. and the misrepresentations that were made. Listen, for time purposes, you talked about the counsel team, Doug, and I want to stay on that for a second. I thought, hey, listen, the thing is, it sounds too good. It's like a bad movie here, like not even a believable Homeland episode, right? Where the two guys 170 feet from the headquarters of the Times are talking loudly about the case and screaming about the White House counsel that's not turning over hidden documents in a safe, except we've gotten confirmation that General Kelly read both Ty Cobb and Dowd the riot act over what they did at that restaurant. We showed the still right there. Would you ever, in the wildest years, talk openly about a case of a client of yours so publicly, strategy or otherwise, in broad daylight?
You know, Rich, I got to be honest with you. People make mistakes. These guys were speaking at lunch.
It's a pretty big mistake.
It is, and you know what? But I got to tell you something.
This
There has to be also something where, you know, this is the representation of somebody. This person is at another table listening, taking pictures of them. That's bizarre.
I'm sorry, in public.
I get it. They made a mistake, but it's bizarre.
If we know we have a very high-profile case, we're not talking about that openly at lunch. But the other thing is, you brought up an interesting point about a chilling effect. But you look at Donald Trump, you have a billionaire here, and by his own, accord, a significant billionaire. And if he feels a chilling effect, what does the average American feel when a FISA warrant signed? So we talked about this way back when they first started these types of warrants, about what does it mean, who gets to check it. But it's interesting that now the people who are all in favor of it when it is applied against little people, now it's not fair.
Mark, before I go to break, you're telling me, and you've got some high-profile clients, that your clients would be happy if you went next door to the New York Times headquarters and with other counsel and I'm thinking about one case in particular working on right now, talked openly about strategy, be angry at the other counsel for 45 minutes at the top of your lungs.
My clients wouldn't know about that because I don't get this, even in my highest profile cases, I don't get this kind of scrutiny. But I want to answer your question to Doug a little bit earlier about whether this is unique or not. I'm the only guy in this room that's tangled with the Weissmans and Andreses of the world. This is standard 101 for them. Remember, these are the people who put Arthur Andersen out of business. These are the people who put Enron out of business, spent millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money. Those verdicts were reversed in substantial part by the U.S. Supreme Court. I tangled with these people in the 90s on mob cases and in the 2000s on mob cases. They are true believers. They are bullies in suits. I will say that right here and right now.
Let's not make Enron
No.
Wait a minute. Every person in jail knows that their conversations are surveilled, no matter how small your case is, and that if your lawyer's speaking openly about your case and you're ready to go to trial, you're going to have this happen.
They will investigate this, and they will find things, and they will find things on Manafort, and they will find things on Flynn, and they will bring charges, and they will make every effort to justify the extraordinary waste of taxpayer money that's being lavished on them right now. No, that's called a waste of my money.
We will continue this conversation here, but there's other major news on the Hill outside of this investigation. Republicans got one last shot at repealing Obamacare, if you believe the calendar and the self-imposed deadlines. If they do, they got about a week to do it. The question is, can they do it this time around? Some say yes. Stay with us.